Hi everyone, my name is Yang Liu. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Helsinki. So in this talk, I'm going to present our paper titled On the Negative Perception of Cross-Domain Recommendations and Explanations. This is a joint work with my colleagues, Denis, Kotkov, Medlar, and Dorota, Glowacka. So cross-domain recommendation has gained more interest nowadays, so I think everyone attending this session would probably agree. The basic idea is that we can leverage some information from the source domain in a target domain, and therefore to address some shortcomings of single domain recommenders. For example, the sparse data issue and the co-star problems. As an example, we can leverage users' movies preference to generate book recommendations. This somehow makes sense. For example, imagine a user who really likes to watch science fiction movies might probably want to read some science fiction books. And indeed, cross-domain recommendation have been shown can improve the recommendation performance, especially with users with insufficient historical data. This is measured by some offline evaluation metrics, for example, precision recall, MRR, etc. However, one thing we were pretty surprised to find is that there are no prior studies on understanding user perceptions of cross-domain recommendations. So this basically means that we don't actually know whether cross-domain recommendation is really helpful or not from users' perspective. So in this study, we want to fill in this gap and to investigate how user perceives cross-domain recommendations. And in a relevant topic, recommendation explanations have also been shown some benefits, for example, to increase users' interest and affect user perceptions positively, but in single domain recommendations. So again, this is not explored in cross-domain settings. Even though we found several recent survey articles arguing that cross-domain models with explainability might improve user perceptions in terms of transparency, persuasiveness, and trustworthiness. So it might also be interesting to look at cross-domain recommendation explanations. So basically, our work is about a user study. And for the study design, we identified three major experimental confounders. First of all, it must be clear for each participant what information is available for getting these recommendations. So these are the two topics we try to investigate. The recommendation settings, whether it is single domain or cross-domain recommendations, and explanations, whether explanations are present or not. So this gives us both scenarios, and also gives us a good reason for using a between subject study design, which basically means that each participant is only situated in one scenario. And second, the quality of recommendations must be constant across all scenarios. I want to emphasize that we actually focused on how cross-domain recommendation setting itself can affect user perceptions. So considering this, how should we generate recommendations? A very natural thought would be that, yes, we can use some single domain recommendation and cross-domain recommendation algorithms to generate recommendations. But there are some problems. For example, if we found that single domain recommendation performs much better than cross-domain recommendation, we actually don't know what happened. It could be the case that the cross-domain recommendation setting is just worse. Or it could also be that we just unfortunately selected one bad CDR algorithm. So to avoid this, what we did is actually to generate random recommendation lists. We proposed several steps to make sure that these recommendation lists contain random and diverse recommendations, and we also try to balance their quality. So by doing this, we think we can somehow eliminate the influence of using specific algorithms. Finally, as we want to make some statement about explanations, so we need to first verify that our generated explanations can credibly justify recommendations. For your information, our explanations are composed of both common and uncommon tags between users' favorites items, for example, movies or books, and also the book recommendations. And we use this data set called tag genomes to generate these tags. About how to validate these explanations, we actually asked participants to help. And the results are basically quite good. So as we can see here, in a majority of cases, users agreed with the explanations we generated. Here is a more detailed version of our research question: how cross-domain recommendations and explanations affect user perceptions and behavioral intentions. So how do we measure these two things? For behavioral intentions, it is quite related to users' interest, so we can directly measure them by ratings provided by users. And for user perceptions, we have these 7 measures corresponding to different aspects of user perceptions extracted from the literature. I will explain these aspects while we discuss the results just in a minute. So please note that all these measures are measured on 5-point Likert scale. Okay, before we dive into results, this is how our study looks like. So each participant was directed to one of these 4 scenarios. And we first asked users to rate book recommendations. This is related to user interest analysis. And then answer questionnaires corresponding to 7 aspects of user perceptions. And finally, verify the explanations. Our study was conducted on Amazon Mechanical Turk, and we received responses from 237 valid participants. By valid, we mean that we somehow eliminated those suspicious users by some trap questions. And recall that we adopted the between subject design, so this gives us a fairly balanced number of participants for each scenario. About our results, due to time limits, I will only present the most important results from our work. Our analysis is based on ordinal logistic regression, considering that our data is on 5-point Likert scale. So to model the user perceptions, we have 4 independent variables. SIGIR means that whether it is cross-domain recommendation or not, whether explanations are present or not, and an interaction term between SIGIR and explanations. There's one additional vector, which is familiarity. This is just for like getting better model and to achieve higher AIC. By the way, this table here lists all the odds ratio for these variables that are statistically significant. So we know that for odds ratio, if it's greater than 1, good, it's positive influence. If it's lower than 1, negative influence. If it's equals to 1, neutral. Okay, so we found that cross-domain recommendation has some negative impact on user trust. Okay, user trust means that it lowers users' confidence in the system. And we found that adding explanations can somehow increase the transparency, so to help user better understand how these recommendations are generated. And it also increases scrutability, meaning that now it makes it easier for users to identify errors in the system. Okay, so as none of these interaction terms are significant, which basically means that there's no significant difference between cross-domain explanations and single-domain explanations. For behavioral intentions, similarly, we have that cross-domain recommendations decreases users' interest. This might be relevant to the decreasing of user trust that we found. Surprisingly, we found that explanations can somehow decrease users' interest in single-domain recommendations. We suspect this is because maybe we use uncommon tags, so we're already telling users that these items have some features that you disliked. But we indeed found that explanations can increase users' interest in the cross-domain recommendation settings. However, compared to single domain recommendation alone, the odds ratio is still lower than 1, which basically means that it is not as good as single domain recommendation alone. So to quickly summarize, in this work, we present the first user study for user perceptions of cross-domain recommendations and explanations. Our main finding is that cross-domain recommendations can decrease user trust and the user's interest, even though explanations can somehow mitigate this problem of negative user perceptions, but it is still perceived as inferior to single-domain recommendation alone. And this raises an interesting question that offline and online evaluations in cross-domain recommendations may yield different results. So sometimes we see that some algorithms achieved higher precisions or recalls, but the real problem is that is this improvement high enough to make some difference in online settings or in real applications? This is why we're arguing that user experiments are important in the evaluation of cross-domain recommendations. Okay, about future work, yes, our work has several limitations. We only explore very limited settings. So in future work, we want to explore more general cases. For example, different definitions of domains and different explanation styles. Okay, this is all about my talk. Thank you for your attention.